Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Rohingya Women Webinar Series 2021 on the topic of resistance and resilience in reclaiming narratives and reclaiming power. In this series, we will explore powerful stories, inspiration, and resilience of women whose works have been vital to the betterment of Rohingya and Myanmar-Burma society in commemoration of the resistance movement for freedom and democracy like the 888 uprising, as well as the Rohingya Genocide Remembrance Day on August 25th. We cannot forget that women have been fundamental movers and shakers in all the past and present resistance movements. It is important that their voice, their stories, and their strength are celebrated. My name is Yasminullah, and I am a Rohingya human rights activist who will be your host today. Firstly, let me thank you all for joining us on this call, as well as those who have joined us via Facebook. A reminder that this is a public event and we will be recording this session and upload the video onto various social media platforms later on. This is the 6th of our webinar throughout the entirety of August. We only have one session left tomorrow with Mawe Wenu, where we'll be interacting, exploring, and discussing different social issues facing women of Myanmar Burma. So please stay tuned until the end. And I will be leaving the registration information for tomorrow's event. Before I introduce you to our very special guest today, I would like to remind everyone who have joined us on Zoom to please mute yourself throughout the webinar until the question and answer session. If there are any burning questions at all, you can drop them. Please feel free to drop them in the chat box and I'll be sure to ask them for you. You can tweet us at the hashtag Rohingya-women-webinar during this session, as well as tweeting the speaker here using the following handles, and I will be sharing that with you shortly. And please make sure to use hashtags resistance, hashtag resilience if possible, so that your tweets could be linked to today's webinar. Now, without further ado, let me introduce you to our special speaker today, Phyu Pannu Khin. She is a very, very inspiring person and a mental health professional. Phyu Pannu Khin was born and brought up in Myanmar, Burma. Prior to graduate school, she completed her bachelor degree in neuroscience and spent 3 years in Boston working at Harvard teaching hospitals. She currently is a PhD candidate in clinical psychology and had several years of research and clinical work in trauma. So let me actually welcome you. It has been such an honor to actually work with you, and you know, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today with the webinar. Welcome, Phyu Pannu Khin.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. Thank you for inviting me for this webinar series. What an honor to get to share the space with you. And I also wanted to just start by saying, Rohingya brothers and sisters, I stand with you in solidarity, and especially in commemorating of the Rohingya genocide in this series. It's such an honor to be able to participate. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. The honor is all ours. Let's actually just jump right in, if you don't mind. Please share with us a little bit about your journey and how you've decided to become a mental health professional. Why do you think it is important for you to take this route of journey?
Sure. So I was born and grew up in Myanmar, and just like anyone from our community, I understood trauma and resilience since I was a young age. Especially my father was a former political prisoner, and through him, I knew and loved many brave activists and former political prisoners who were survivors of torture and imprisonments and trauma. So, you know, since I was really young, I think I learned really new things, two main things about trauma. That first of all, how strong and resilient our community, our people are, and two, at the same time, how much systemic level of support and trauma healing work is needed throughout, since mental health programs did not exist, you know, for our community. So since growing up, I really wanted to work in the field, starting from the age that I started to understand better about trauma and mental health issues. And so as growing up, I was at medical school for a couple of months, and that's when I first got to the United States to come with the cultural exchange program. And I was at Montana State at that time. And that's when I started to really learn about more evidence-based approach to help heal trauma, and how much is still unknown yet for our culture. And for me, so my grandparents were like Shan, and I'm a Shan Burma mix, but still I had a lot of privilege. I grew up in Yangon, and even then, I understood real issues of trauma resilience. So we're really thinking about our ethnic minorities like Rohingya brothers and sisters communities. So much more healing was needed, and that really brought me to think about, in the field of psychology, a lot of trauma treatment programs, what we call as evidence-based treatments, designed and have been studied from Western philosophies and Western kind of cultural perspectives. And while there's a universal experience of suffering and universal experience of healing that are very much relevant for our people, I wanted to really just contribute more from our cultural perspective. So that led me to pursue this current program and doing my PhD in clinical psychology, and particularly focusing on resilience.
Yeah. I mean, obviously there's a lot of racism and a lot of Eurocentric perspective that's brought on to, or like infused within the mental health realm, right? And I really, really appreciate you taking this on and deconstruct some of those, because I think, as much as we're trying, me personally living in Canada, where there are a lot of Indigenous communities who are trying to also deconstruct some of that, and I'm sure Native American community also try to do that in America. It is so empowering in a way to actually see that a really, really inspiring woman in our community, from Myanmar, Burma, who's actually trying to do this work and bring it on to, to actually implement it within our own community. I think there needs to be a lot more of you. And I hope that you will trailblaze, and leave the path for us, following behind you. Let me actually jump right on to the next question. There's so much, there's so much that we still don't know, but what is mental health, and why is it important that we talk about this, especially during the time of political violence?
Definitely. Yes, that's a really great question, especially for our culture. We do have a lot of shame and stigma thinking about mental health. And I think one common misconception is people tend to think, mental health means like just struggling with mental health diseases or mental health disorders. I'm okay, I don't need to talk about or think about it. And that's such a common misconception, because mental health, just like physical health, is important for everyone. As long as we are alive, we need to be thinking about mental health. It impacts all of us, because mental health really includes emotional, psychological, and cognitive health, include our social well-being. So it impacts all areas of our lives, really. And so the strength of our mental health would affect how we think, how we feel and act in our daily lives. And it also really going to determine how we handle stress and how we handle life's adversities. So right now, when we think about for our Myanmar context, especially during political violence, all of our lives have been completely disrupted and unstable, and we're really daily, experiencing losses, grief, and trauma that no one deserves to experience. So, especially during this time, from the global health level, there's a research from WHO showing that if there is a major political conflicts going on, like we are, in general, 1 in 5 people on average will experience some types of mental health conditions. And so just really normalizing that we are bound to experience and struggle with mental health, because there's huge systemic violence, systemic issues going on that impact all of our lives, and none of us are safe, none of our loved ones have been safe. And we have witnessed a lot of atrocities and violence since February 1st, and much more beyond for many of our, especially ethnic minorities like our Rohingya brothers and sisters since genocide. How many years, right, of all of this violence and trauma. So it's really important to highlight that, especially during this time, during these times, it's so important for us to think about and talk about mental health, so that we are better aware of how we're individually being impacted by these challenging times, and how we can kind of try to cope, as well individually, as well help each other cope during these times, so that we can be collectively well during these very unstable times.
Absolutely, totally agree. I realize that even for myself, like working, trying to bring the attention to the trauma itself, even if I'm not like directly impacted, it does have like the collective toll on various different aspects of life, and it can be very disruptive, as you said. Um, Moving a little bit to a little bit of a darker subject, but I think it needs to be talked about a little bit more. And I don't think that we discuss this very much within our own community, at least not as deeply as we need to in terms of mental health issues and otherwise. Um, we experience a lot of sexual and gender-based violence within Myanmar, and I want to ask you, as a mental health professional, is sexual and gender-based violence, is it psychologically motivated?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, man. So typically, again, during political conflicts and political violence, perpetrators tend to intentionally use sexual and gender-based violence against women and gender minorities. It's about power and control, right? It's about really, and another thing, women tends to be the target, is that women are really important parts of all society. Women are the leaders, main caretakers of various levels of society, families, community, organizations. So by using something such very intimate and interpersonal violence like sexual violence, they aim to perpetrators like military, aiming to take away that kind of trying to take away that kind of power from women, so that the intention is one woman are struggling with that shame because of, again, patriarchal culture, women are bound to struggle with those shame again, although they are not to be blamed, but victims tend to experience those significant level of shame, and then as a result, they tend that it's going to weaken like communities that they're trying to target. Is like what the perpetrators tend to think about psychologically, from what we know of. So that's what we saw with what Myanmar military did in Myanmar context, especially for a Rohingya community context, by intentionally committing this widespread and systemic rape, violence, and humiliation. It's really an intentional part of their genocide and ethnic cleansing against Rohingya community, because psychologically, again, women, by really using this extreme level of sexual violence, they are trying to prevent women to be politically active or standing up against violence, as well as, again, because women are such essential parts of communities and main caregivers of families. Their intention might be that by suppressing and causing severe harm to women, you potentially destroy the whole communities. And so, such kind of severe and systemic sexual violence, they are also going to lead to like forced exilation and relocations of women and communities, again, by intentionally using that kind of sexual violence. And, right now also, during the political violence, it's really the outcome of the combination of our patriarchal culture, gender inequality, and like the lack of rule of law. When all of that is combined, women are no longer safe, not just from those, so there are so many layers of violence and trauma as well. So from the security forces, as well as at risk of any type of sexual violence from the other community members as well, for the lack of words, because when there is no lack of rule of law, where thinking about power and control, women tends to be target for both those sexually being sexually harassed or abused and like targeted. So that has been quite documented, especially for Myanmar context in our field of psychology and like all social sciences studies as well. So and then there's a culture of impunity. No one has been kept accountable for the crimes against humanity and then crimes that they committed, especially for sexual violence that the military committed against our Rohingya communities and other ethnic minorities. So, there's a really important book called License to Rape, that I really encourage folks to check it out, that, that describe how the Burmese military regime uses sexual violence as intentional war tactics to suppress women, and they do have the license to rape because of the culture of impunity, and that's how they approach, to suppress and destroy communities by targeting women.
Wow, yeah. I definitely see a lot of those combination of the targeted attacks on women, be it intentional or not, right? I think that there are certain documentations of that within Rohingya community as well, where once the victimization starts, it never actually stops unless the community comes together and try to break the cycle. Which brings me to the next question, actually. What is trauma?
Mm-hmm. So yes, earlier when you talked about the collective trauma, you're such a good point. Trauma is, such an complex issue, because right now when we see our people being hurt and like being, killed, being exposed to such systemic violence, we are also experiencing trauma. So trauma can be whether you are either directly having personal experience or witnessing the people that witnessing those atrocities being committed to people that you care about. So basically trauma is our psychological response one day to a very, very deeply distressing or disturbing event that is usually life-threatening or make us lose our sense of safety in the world. So traumatic experience would typically include these experience of systemic violence and harm that we've been talking about, as well as other types of physical injury, life-threatening events, and various types of abuse, including physical abuse, sexual abuse, and rape, war and violence, and natural disasters. So when you think of all of those categories of life-threatening events, the common underlying is that individuals feels very close to to their lives being harmed, or people they love being harmed, or like they might have really experienced people being harmed, and they were not able to stop it. There was no control, so there was no sense of safety. There was, so whether we directly personally experience those or witnessing, experiencing those events lead a long-term impact, on our psychological health, and that's because that's just going to be natural for all of us. Our brains are designed to protect us. So when we are being unsafe at that level, we are going to be on edge, and we're going to be having psychological reactions because of that trauma moving forward, trying to protect ourselves because we don't know what safety after that very extreme experiences, right? After that anymore. So really having to relearn to cope with this trauma is so important. I forgot to address, I also wanted to address, Yasmin, talking about trauma is very triggering. Hearing about these things really difficult, especially there's still ongoing trauma for us right now. It's not done yet, so I just wanted to say this to our audience members, please take care of yourself as you're listening to this. If it's difficult, please take a break and come back, or that, please try to take some deep breaths, or like please be gentle for yourself. These things are difficult to hear.
Absolutely. I appreciate you giving us a little bit of a fair warning there. It's definitely difficult to be kind to yourself, especially in this moment where we're just almost driven to do the most, as much as possible, to actually help lessen the pain or the hurt that have been inflicted upon our own people. But it's also important that we remember, it is going to need a sustained effort in order to calm any of these different types of mass atrocities or any kind of pain that's inflicted upon our community. So since we already talked about trauma, what are some of the long-term consequences of trauma?
Yeah, Yasmin. So that's really, I think, such an important part of our conversations to be thinking about. So long-term consequences of trauma, there are so many different types of trauma reactions, but typically that would include very unpredictable and strong negative emotions. So that is driven by fear and anxiety naturally, because we were extremely unsafe, or like we were hurt severely in that particular traumatic event. So even years later, even months later, we might suddenly feel so fearful or like so angry, or suddenly so depressed and anxious. And so all of those, we even call this like emotional storms, because it feels, it's not like, you know, everyone experience negative emotions everyone now and then, but like because of trauma, what we experience is so severe and intense, and people might even like experience like out of body experience. For example, they're so scared that they don't feel safe in their own body anymore. They feel so angry that they might just do something, you know, impulsively, and really losing in touch with their own bodies or with the current moment, with the reality. So some of those very extreme emotional reactions, and other common reactions like nightmares and flashbacks about traumatic memories. So feeling like we're reliving and re-experience those trauma again, both when we sleep and when we are like awake. So they come back when you're sleeping in your nightmares, or like during the daytime, they come back kind of like, you know, almost like this horrifying movies playing back. Like it feels like you're reliving those moments during the day, and they are called like flashbacks. So that can be some consequences. And another part is feeling really disconnected and dissociated. Some people feel this, you know, experience of like frozen. So because of trauma, we also conceptualize the, you know, typical reactions folks may experience is like fight, flight, or freeze, right? Like, so fight as in because we've been hurt like severely by that traumatic event, our body or brains biologically is trying to fight off like whatever is trying to attack us. So that tends to resist long term, like even years later, you know, because of trauma, some people might be in this fight mode and always feeling really not trusting of others, not trusting of themselves, or like in new situations, they're in this fight mode and really feeling scared at all times. Or they might also be like flight, like they fight as in like reactive, you know, with anger. And for flight would be like trying to flee, trying to escape any difficult situations that make them feel anxious or fearful. And so, you know, for those individuals, they might have a hard time functioning towards their values. Like, you know, they might really care about families or school, but they're having a hard time going back to those areas because they don't feel safe anymore, you know. Well, and then the frozen reactions are also really common. It's also a really scary moment of feeling numb. You don't feel negative emotion as well as positive emotion. So it feels like you're really not like yourself. You can make decisions. You're just like frozen in that time moment. And so all of these typical reactions that we tend to see. Another thing is like being hyper vigilant. So, you know, for example, throughout this times of political violence, people might still be hearing gunshots or like, you know, the sounds of like air bombing. Even when they get to relative safety, like those sounds might still be there. So they might be experiencing being really jumpy or easily startled. You know, they might be like small noise that no one noticed, but you are like jumpy and really scared. And so being hyper aware of everything that's going on around you. So the really hard thing, Yasmin, is that, you know, other people, for example, someone with trauma reactions might be experiencing all of that in their heads, and the family members might not even be aware of that. So they might be saying that she is, you know, really having these explosions out of nowhere. She's crying out of nowhere. It's like, what's happening? We don't know how to support. So that those, you know, so I think this psychoeducation is really important for folks to realize that sometimes they might be reliving that very scary experience, and, you know, trying to be as understanding and as supportive as possible if you have individuals you love who are struggling with trauma.
Thank you very much for you know, those very like important recap. I think even if, you know, some of us might not be able to have the access to therapy or to the help that we need, just hearing that some of the things that happen to us or some of the symptoms that we experience are genuinely universal, and, you know, it actually happens to other people as well, and it's well documented within the, you know, psychological realm. It's validating that you know, things are happening not because of us, not because we're the ones, you know, going crazy, or we're the ones, you know, at fault, but it's actually because we're the byproduct of our social environment.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes, man. Thank you for pointing that out. Because those experiences are so scary and it makes you feel like you are not yourself, like you losing your mind or you losing your personality. It's very scary. And folks might be, hard on themselves that might being weak for, constantly crying or having nightmares. Why can I move on? So it's not as simple like that when we are, safety has been destroyed that way. We are going to have like psychological reactions like that. So really good example is to think about like it feels like we've been burned. Like if our skin has been burned by fire, we are going to experience that pain. But the really good news is everyone is bound to experience that pain after trauma. But really good news is that trauma healing is possible. People are incredibly resilient, especially our communities, especially like resilience. So like trauma healing is possible, but being aware of when I'm experiencing all of those. So what I told the summarize so far was a psychological reaction. There are also a whole bunch of physical reactions as well. Like people might even passed out, always having cold hands and fingers, and having a hard time breathing, nausea, vomiting, so a whole bunch, right? Like, so really understanding that there are millions of people out there really, struggling with trauma, but millions of people healing at the same time too. So both are true. And when you're struggling with that, it's just our biology is working. It just shows that our brains are working. So that's the good news. That if we are struggling, and at the same time, there are ways to cope, and we can help each other cope. We can learn to cope better.
Yeah, thank you very much for actually reminding us that it's very much it is the same as physical ailments. If we experience it, there will be a period that we need in order to heal, and that conceptualization is really, really important, so that we don't go down the spiral and just think that, oh no, we're not going to be able to get out of this, because it's similar. If we put in the work of trying to get better, we will eventually get better. Here's another question that I think would be really, really important, particularly because we're talking about Rohingya women and women from ethnic communities, and women from marginalized communities all over Myanmar, Burma. What is the gendered aspect of trauma, and why are women disproportionately more affected by it?
Thank you for that question. Yasmin, that's a really important one. And globally, we see that women are at higher risk for experiencing trauma in general. And this is because of, again, what we talked about, sexual violence as well as domestic abuse. Women tend to be the victim of both of those sexual violence and domestic abuse. And so they are what we call as interpersonal violence, so, and then there are other types of trauma called like combat trauma. Combat trauma is from war, like physical aggression. So men tend to be the survivors of those types of like physical combat trauma. So, psychologically, what it does to us is, though, if someone, is hurting you physically, both of those, all types of trauma, of course, cause long-term severe negative consequences for both men and women. However, for men, if someone is attacking you physically, you might be able to cope with that like years later without internalizing it deeply. For women, experience of sexual trauma especially tends to lead to like feelings of shame and self-blame, somehow wondering, could I have like protected myself better? Is that my fault that I was exposed to this situation? So that type of experience tend to be more commonly seen in my women, so, and right now for us in the middle of a coup, and for our Rohingya community, especially women, have been exposed to a more high impact trauma, we call, like, because of, again, that sexual violence. But even globally, we see that, every 1 in every 4 women tend to be raped or experience sexual violence by age of 44. In comparison, only 8% of men are. So even that data alone globally, how like horrifying and prevalent sexual violence is. And then think about that when there is no rule of law, when there is no, and there's like extreme patriarchal culture like our communities, like how much more risk women will be experiencing for those sexual violence, right? And another thing is women tend to also experience traumatic life experience at an earlier age. So childhood trauma tends to be also more common in girls than boys. So we see that in psychological research that even how caregivers or like potential perpetrators or abusers tend to target little girls than boys. And like so women, you know, for both physical abuse and emotional abuse, sexual abuse, all of those. So the earlier a person experiences trauma, the more it negatively impacts brain health and development. So that is also why women are at a higher risk for psychological trauma, because of that higher risk for early childhood trauma as well. You know, so really thinking about, of course, you know, severe experience of trauma reactions can eventually lead to this mental health condition called post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. And all men and women can experience PTSD, all types of symptoms, but even then, you know, how trauma show up or like how it manifests can be different between men and women. So women, you know, might, as we were talking about earlier, after experiencing something like sexual violence, they tend to internalize it like, oh my God, it was me. We're all, society also tell women, it is you like not, you know, being safe enough, whatever, not doing blank enough to protect yourself. So that kind of like narrative also, of course, worsen trauma reactions. Whereas, you know, men's trauma reactions might lead to more like physical aggression or impulsivity. So they are also struggling, right? Because of trauma, men are also struggling. And for them, instead of internalizing, they externalize. Their trauma reactions come out often, right? Like in terms of aggression, in terms of substance use. And so really thinking about how, you know, and again, research is still ongoing. This is not true for every man and woman, of course, but it's really important to, I think, be aware of the general pattern, because, you know, it's also our, you know, socialized gender roles play a role here. I think, you know, there's a biological perspective, hormonal differences that causes women to, you know, have more internalizing experiences, but also like socialized gender roles, right? Across culture, men, like patriarchal culture teaches men that you're not supposed to show your feelings, express your emotions. So when they struggle, they bottle it up, they don't get help. And so these emotions will emerge in other forms that are more harmful, like that will bubble up and on the surface as anger and aggression. And when that happens, who tends to be the victim again? Usually other women in that man's life, right? Like, so really thinking about all of these layers of trauma reactions and differences between men and women is really important. And I share all of this because, you know, we understand that controlling behaviors or like violent behaviors can be a sign of mental health conditions and like underlying trauma for many people, including men. But, you know, mental illness or mental health condition does not justify abuse for everyone. So really important to keep spreading this message, because, you know, both our men and women deserve support. Both men and women deserve support, as well as they need to take accountability for their actions. So really being aware of how is my life trauma impacting me right now, that, you know, that are not as healthy for me or for my loved ones, and how can I, you know, work on that to be healthier. It's a long question for this very important, complex kind of question.
No, this is a lot of them. I'm learning so much new information right now, and I'm so grateful that you're sharing all of this, because I think it is not just true to you know, our Myanmar or Burma society as a whole, you know, various different ethnic communities, marginalized communities, right? But I think it's true all over the world. It's such a global issue, and because patriarchy is the setup, the system, the global system that we're all functioning in, it is doomed to actually create this sort of inequality, and then, you know, a cycle of abuse that continues to perpetrate or perpetuate those same elements that cause women to carry more gender-based trauma. Thank you so much. Like, wow, I should be charged to learn all of this information, but thank you so much for sharing this with us. Now, moving on to our, like, I think the most important thing to talk about is the action. What can we do, right? So what do you recommend to those who may still think or still doubt that mental health or healing trauma, you know, is important? They might not think that it is as important, especially not right now during the Spring Revolution. They think, okay, we have so much things, you know, so many things to do, but we don't really have time to heal or try to, you know, work on our trauma right now. What do you say about that?
Yeah, definitely. Yes, ma'am. That's a really good question. I think because of, again, our cultural values and like stigma attached to mental health, um, people might not see the importance of mental health, but they are struggling though. They are just, struggling to some degrees because all of us have been hurt, after experiencing significant losses and grief and trauma. We are all kind of going through a lot of difficult times. And so, during this time, if for folks who are kind of thinking that healing is not important, like, mental health is not an important thing to talk about, they might be experiencing, what psychological responses like denial, avoidance, which is already a type of psychological response. And so because, if they earlier we're talking about the frozen response, some people might be also just like feeling kind of numb, and so they they might be in this space of like, we have to, we don't have time to take care of mental health, we don't have time to take care of ourselves, let's keep pushing for the revolution or like whatever we're working on. But if you don't pause and kind of take care of yourself or like reflect yourself, how I can take care of myself better, it's kind of like pressure cooker is going to burst at some point, and like that is going to be, I'm typically worried about that, not just for individual health, but for the collective health, collective, strength and resilience. Each of us is really important for this revolution to succeed. All of you are very, very important. Each of your lives are important, and so for the revolution to succeed, given that we each play such an important role, we cannot get burned out, we cannot get sick. This, again, earlier I was talking about how trauma also leads to very physical health illness issues. And so if we don't pause and try to cope with that or trying to get help, it's going to be like pressure cooker, like bursting at some point, and like that is not going to help our revolution or anybody, that you care about. So and another part is like that cultural perspective of, maybe seeing themselves as like feeling weak or feeling not as strong if you're struggling with mental health. And that, that's just a common issue, misconception that we need to let go of as well. So, another thing we can kind of think of mental health is like, it feels like we are in the middle of this huge rainstorm, and in the middle of the rainstorm, it's inevitable that we are all going to shake if we are trees, right, in the middle of the rainstorm. And attending to mental health is basically kind of like trying to grow stronger roots, so that you stand and then you pass through until the storm ends. And we know that the storm is going to end, our revolution is going to succeed at some point, and we need you until then. But that means you need really strong roots, right? Really strong roots. And that means attending to your mental health. And so, so if you are trees, what are some of your grounding things? What are some of your, what are some of the things that replenish you, nourish you, to be able to stand, like in the middle of the storm? So like, I think that analogy is kind of helpful to think about, if you are shaking, if your loved ones are shaking, they are not weak. It's just we're going through the storm. We are humans and we are going to shake, but how can we grow really strong roots so that we are going to pass this storm? Is a really important, I think, analogy to think about.
I am so just blown away by the analogies you're using today. Like, all of them are incredibly helpful to think about. And
with the analogies, I walk around with these analogies as a therapist.
It's incredibly moving and really help us conceptualize how we're going to be able to, move forward, not just thinking about how we're going to be able to cope personally, but like thinking collectively. So I really, really appreciate you bringing that, and teaching us about all of those things that you probably practice in your own work. Here is another, like, I think that it would be important too. I don't know how much you'd be able to do this, but I would love for you to be able to maybe say the same thing, concisely, maybe. If you would like to go longer, no problem, but in Burmese, just so that I can cut out some of this part, so that I can share it with our Burmese audience and have wider reach.
Yes. So do you mean say everything I just said about the rainstorm and trees in Burmese,
Yes,
right?
please.
Okay. Yeah. ဟုတ်ကဲ့ပါကျွန်မအခုပြောနေရတော့ဒီပေါ်တုံးလေးအောင်မြင်မှုအတွက်ကျွန်မတို့တူတယောက်ချင်းစီရဲ့ကျမ်းမာရေးအရင်မဲ့အရေးကြီးပါတယ်စိတ်ကျူးတဲ့စိတ်ကျမ်းမာရေးကအရေးကြီးဆုံးပဲဖြစ်ပါတယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့တော့ကျွန်မတို့အနေနဲ့စဉ်းစားကြည့်မယ်ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်တုံးလေးကာလမှာဆုံးရှုံးမှုအများကြီးခံစားရတာဒီ trauma အမျိုးပေါ့စိတ်တန်ရာအများကြီးခံစားနေရတာကျွန်မဥမာအနေနဲ့တင်စားပြီးပြောရမယ်ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ဒီပေါ့နော်မုံတိုင်းအကြီးကိုကြော်ဖြတ်နေတဲ့အချိန်နဲ့တူပါတယ်ပေါ့နော်နောက်တစ်ခါတုံးလိုက်ရေးဒီပေါ်စစ်အာဏာသိမ်းတဲ့ကာလနောက်ပိုင်းဖြစ်လာတဲ့ပြဿနာတွေဒုက္ခတွေကြောင့်ပေါ့နော်ခံစားရတဲ့ဝေဒနာတွေအားလုံးကလည်းကျွန်တော်တို့အနေနဲ့ဒါဒီမုံတိုင်းအကြီးကိုကြော်ဖြတ်နေရတယ်အချိန်နဲ့အတူတူပဲဖြစ်ပါတယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲဒီမုံတိုင်းငါတစ်ချိန်ကျရင်တော့ရက်စဲသွားမှာပဲကျမတို့ရက်စဲသွားအချိန်ကတုံတိုင်းအောင်မြင်တဲ့နေ့ဖြစ်မယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲဒီနေ့ကိုရောက်မှာပဲလို့ကျမတို့ကယုံကြည်ရဲ့ရောက်လဲရောက်ရမယ်ဒါပေမဲ့အဲ့လိုရောက်နိုင်ဖို့အတွက်ကျမတို့ကမုံတိုင်းတွေကတစ်ပင်နေဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ပေါ့နော်ဒီတစ်ပင်အနေနဲ့မပြိုလဲသွားအောင်ဘယ်လိုရက်တည်နေမလဲပေါ့အဲ့လိုရက်တည်နေအောင်ကျမတို့ကဒီအမြင့်တွေပေါ့နော်အမြင့်တွေကိုင်ကိုအမြင့်ကိုကိုင်ဆွဲထားမယ်ပေါ့ငါမပြိုလဲသွားဘူးအမြင့်ကြီးမားတိဆောက်နိုင်လေအမြင့်ကိုခိုင်မြဲစွာကိုင်ဆွဲကိုင်နေလေဒီတစ်ပင်ကအကြံခဲ့မှာပို့ပြီးသေးကြလေပေါ့နော်ကျွန်မစိတ်ကျမ်းမာရေးကိုအချိန်ယူပြီးကြယူဆိုင်တယ်ဆိုတာဒီလိုမျိုးပေါ့နော်ဒီလေးမုံနိုင်ထဲမှာရှင်တန်ပြီးကြံရဲ့တစ်ပင်တွေဖြစ်အောင်ပေါ့နော်ဒီအမြင့်ကိုစဉ်းစားပြီးတော့ပေါ့နော်အဲ့လိုစဉ်းစားပြီးတော့ဒီ nutrition ရအောင်ပေါ့ကိုယ့်ရဲ့စိတ်နဲ့ကျန်းမာရေးကိုဘယ်လိုအရာတွေအားရင်ဖြည့်ပေးလို့ရှိလဲဘယ်လိုအရာတွေကစိတ်ခွန်အားပေးလဲပေါ့အဲ့စိတ်ခွန်အားရင်တွေကကျမတို့ရဲ့အမြင့်တွေပဲဖြစ်ပါတယ်နော်ကျမတို့ရဲ့တပင်အဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ဒါကြောင့်စိတ်ကျန်းမာရေးကိုကျမတို့ကမလျှော့မပေါ့ပဲနဲ့ပေါ့လေအရေးကြီးအရာကိစ္စတစ်ခုအနေနဲ့တော်လိုင်းရေးအောင်မြင်ဖို့အတွက်ပေါ့နော်တမိုးထားပြီး view site ကိုအရေးကြီးရလို့ပဲကျမပြောချင်ပါတယ်
Thank you so much, Ma. It's so incredibly important for us to, you know, at least make it accessible for our Myanmar Burma brothers and sisters to actually access some of this information. And I'm hoping that we'd be able to have some more of this in the future. And I'm already like going to tie you up with us a little bit longer with the Rohingya Women webinar series in the next season. But I hope that you can join us again with, you know, with all of your insights and wisdom. I think we can have 100 sessions with you and it still would not be enough. But I think for today, there is another question that I would like to ask you. And I think it would be one of the most important one, which I hope that you can also speak in Burmese as well after we finish from the English. What do you recommend? You know, how do we cope during this instability to maintain good mental health? And are there any exercises that we can do? And I would love to do that with you.
That's so cool. Thank you for offering that, Yasmin. I was thinking of that we could practice some of the kind of grounding techniques that I was just mentioning, you know, together. So, you know, thinking about trauma, healing trauma and trying to take care of mental health means like sustaining our resilience. So resilience is, you know, kind of process of adapting well, even in the face of these significant trauma and adversity. So, you know, resilience is saying to ourselves, I might be shaken, I might be even bent, but I'm not going to break. I'm going to bounce back from these experiences. It's like resilience. So in that way, you know, this means that resilience means, you know, we can still have mental health symptoms or like distress. Resilience doesn't mean that we are free from psychological distress. That's just like not possible. We are going to suffer. Like, you know, we cannot avoid this pain because like, you know, military regime is intentionally causing us harm, and as humans we are going to experience distress, and that's just our humanity. So accepting them give us some room to cope, accepting that it's not that I'm weak, it's that I'm being human, I'm having human reactions when the military is killing my people I love, right? So thinking about, so in those moments what's really important for us is to, again, what we're be helpful to and make your roots really strong, right? So thinking about some really helpful exercise that we can do is to stay very focused in the present moment. So trauma reactions are the strongest or like most severe when our mind is in the past, or like, you know, when that memories keep haunting us as if it's happening again. So in this moment, it's really important for us to remind ourselves, you know, right now it's August 30th, Monday. Right now, I'm safe. In this very moment, I'm safe. You know, I was not safe in the past, or my loved ones was not safe. It was not our fault. Like they were intentionally making us unsafe. But right now, I am safe, and I'm gonna trust that my body is a safe place right now, right? So learning to create that safe space in our own body is really an important practice. And we do that by really effective but simple exercises, called deep breathing exercises. We call grounding techniques. So again, going back to our trees, grounding, because even with the storm, we are like staying present in that present moment with our roots, right? So if you're open to that, we can practice some of those together. Yes, deep breathing exercises would be to, it's our breaths are just our best friends. We always have it wherever we are, whether we're hiding, whether we're like alone, whether we're scared, we will always have our breath. So everyone can practice this everywhere, so basically taking deep breaths, when we are scared or when we're having a really tough time is when we breathe really quickly, like shallow breathing, and then like you can't, our body's shaking. So in those moments, we are telling our brain that, hold on, I get myself right now. I'm okay, I'm in a safe place. So we do this by taking long and deep breaths. And there's so many techniques out there too. A really simple one is to count. Inhale 1 through 4. And then exhale 1 through 4. So Yasmin, if you're ready, we can actually put one hand on the chest and one hand on your belly, down there. Now let's start by really breathing all the way into your belly until the belly is round. And then when you breathe out, really make sure all the way comes up from the belly to your chest and then to your nose. So we'll start by slowly inhaling, and I will count this inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Inhale deeply, hold it for a bit, and then exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do another one. So for each inhale, for each exhale, we'll count 1 through 4. When you're ready, we'll start by inhaling again. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. And slowly exhale again. 1, 2, 3, 4. This time you can count it in your own head or in your mind. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4. This time when we breathe in, really invite what you need to feel in this current moment too. Maybe you're inhaling more courage and exhaling out things you don't want to carry or that you want to let go of. So maybe exhaling some fears. Maybe inhaling more hope. Exhaling more worries. Inhaling more self-trust and self-kindness, self-appreciation. And exhaling any self-doubt, self-critical thoughts, or self-harming thoughts. So we're doing this kind of exercise, just inhaling and inhaling and exhaling, and just inviting whatever we want to feel as we come, and then exhaling out things we want to let go of for a bit. So that's the one example. There's so many techniques out there. What was the experience for you, Yasmin?
I feel quite light after that. I feel a little bit less stressed or a little bit worried. So a little bit less of the worries that I think I think it's important for us to also think in terms of wordings that you just used. I've never actually done the breathing exercise with breathing in hope and then breathing out worries. That was really good conceptualization for us to actually um, think and physically, think about how our physicality can impact our mental health.
Right,
Yeah.
definitely. So that mind and body connections, right? So you and I did literally like maybe 5-6 seconds. We just, maybe 10 seconds. We just did 3 breaths, but we both felt a bit lighter. We both felt more grounded, and so I really recommend folks to, take 10 minutes, at least 10 minutes daily. Really start your day with this practice. Start your day with just deep breathing. Starting your day with intention of what you want to feel for that day, what you want to let go of for that day for a little bit. And then throughout the day, whenever you need, just taking those deep breaths break, that's a really helpful one. And other grounding techniques are, basically using our senses, to come back to the reality too. So with trauma, when the emotional experience are intense, it's really hard to be in the present moment, and we might be having a hard time breathing or thinking. So in those moments, we can use our eyes to ask ourselves, what am I seeing right now in this present moment? What am I actually hearing right now? So that when we're hearing gunshots or when we're seeing images of bloody, photos, we can remind ourselves like, yes, that happened. I'm not forgetting. I will never forget about my people's sufferings. But right now, I need to be grounded in the reality that right now I am safe. I'm seeing, for me, plants. I'm seeing Yasmin. I'm seeing my laptop. And I'm hearing us talk. And although I'm hearing gunshots, I know that it's not happening right now. It's just my mind replaying the memories because it's so hard for me to let go of. But so trying to tell ourselves that in the present moment, I see these things, I hear these things, and then there's me touching ourselves so important. Hugging yourself is so important. So really touch yourself when you're scared. Give yourself some massages and like holding your self that you can tell yourself any affirmation that might give you peace or that might give you strength in that moment, like affirming that I'm currently safe. Maybe as a child we were not safe, or like years ago we were not safe, or 2 months ago we were not safe. Right now I am safe. I'm going to try to protect myself in the best way as possible. And those are really helpful. Really treating ourselves as someone we love. Right? When someone we love is crying or scared, what do? We comfort them, right? We give them good food or we hug them. And if you're alone, why not do that for yourself too? Like, when you're in the middle of the night having nightmares, like what would someone you love do to you? Like what would they tell you? How would they nurture you? And like giving that kind of treatment for yourself is really important, Yasmin. So with that practice, we are kind of rewiring our brain and like teaching ourselves again that, military intentionally cause harms to us, but I, myself, and my people are so strong that we can relearn to feel safe in our own bodies. And that's possible. We know that's possible, and like kind of retraining that. And another thing for folks who are blaming themselves about, especially for women, like when you struggle with like self-critical thoughts, why didn't I not protect myself? Really important thing I want to share with you is, since you're alive today, sharing your stories, that means you did everything right. As you got out of that situation to share that stories again, that you are still alive, that means you did everything right, and you just need to continue. Please taking care of yourself, but gently, with pride. What a amazing thing to be the survivor when someone is intentionally trying to hurt you, right? So really taking on that pride so that we are not victims, that military want us to think we are survivors and that we're going to win is the mindset we need to keep fighting daily.
I'm tearing up just hearing this. It's there we go. This is how we do it.
And tears are good. Tears are good. Another thing, Yasmin, you're modeling a great behavior that I, as therapist, really encourage folks to do. Please cry. Don't don't be a robot. We are not robots, and so the more we cry, the braver we become, because we're not afraid of our emotions. We are telling ourselves, I can handle all emotions, and so that gives you freedom if you cry.
Absolutely. I might go cry after, but
yes.
There's a webinar to be hosted. So here's another, I think it would be really important of what you just said. If you could say them in Burmese, however much you can, of course.
Right.
No pressure at all.
Yeah. So I will just summarize all that, coping kind of techniques in Burmese. ကဘာကျမတို့အခုလိုအရန်ခက်ခဲတဲ့အခြေအနေမျိုးမှာပေါ့နော်ဒီ trauma စိတ်ဒဏ်ရာတွေကြောင့်မို့လို့အရန်ကြောက်လန့်နေတဲ့အရန်စိတ်တော့ကရောက်နေတဲ့အချိန်မျိုးမှာကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ကိုယ့်ဘာသာပေါ့နော်ပစ္စုပန်တဲ့မှာနေနိုင်ဖို့အရန်မဲ့အရေးကြီးပါတယ်အဲ့လိုအခြေအနေမျိုးမှာကျမခုနပြောတဲ့တစ်ပင် example လိုပဲပေါ့နော်တစ်ပင်ဒီအတိုင်းပဲကိုကဒီစိတ်ဒဏ်ရာအခြေအနေကြောင့်မို့လို့ပြိုလဲမလို့ဖြစ်နေရဒါပေမဲ့မပြိုလဲတော့ငါကိုယ့်ဘက်ကစိတ်ဘယ်လိုထိမလဲပေါ့နော်အဲ့လိုထိမဲ့လာလို့စဉ်းစားတဲ့အခါမှာဆိုတော့အရေးကြီးဆုံးကတော့ဒီ deep breathing လို့ခေါ်ရဲပေါ့နော်အသက်ရှူသွင်းရှူထုတ်ကိုဖြည်းဖြည်းညင်ညင်တသားနဲ့အာယုံစိုက်ပြီးရှူသွင်းရှူထုတ်လိုက်တာပေါ့နော်ဒါလေးလို့ရှိရင်ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ခုနစိတ်ထဲမှာလွှမ်းမိုးနေတဲ့တောကတွေအတွေးတွေပူပန်တာတွေကခဏလေးရောကြတော့မှာဖြစ်ပါတယ်အဲ့ဒါကိုကျမတို့ဥမာအနေနဲ့ပြောရလို့ရှိရင်လက်ဖက်ကိုရင်ဘတ်ပေါ်မှာတင်ထားမယ်နောက်တစ်ဖက်ကိုဝမ်ဘိုက်ပေါ်မှာတင်ထားမယ်နောက်ပြီးတော့ကျမတို့ကဝင်လေတစ်ချက်တိုင်းကိုဖြည်းဖြည်းလေးရှူသွင်းမှာဟိုးဝမ်ဘိုက်ထဲရောက်တဲ့အထိနောက်ထွက်လေကိုဖြည်းဖြည်းလေးရှူထုံးမယ်ဟိုးဝမ်ဘိုက်ပိန်သွားပြီးတော့ပေါ့နော်အစုပ်ထဲကနေပြန်ထွက်လာတဲ့အထိအဲ့လိုလေ့ကျင့်နေတဲ့အချိန်မှာတခြားဘာမှမစင်ကြပဲဝင်လေထွက်လေပဲအာရုံပြုပြီးကျမတို့လေ့ကျင့်ကြည့်ရအောင်ဝင်လေတစ်ချက်တိုင်းကိုကျမတို့တစ်ကနေ၄ထိရည်မယ်ထွက်လေတစ်ချက်တိုင်းကိုတစ်ကနေ၄ထိရည်မယ်ဝင်လေတစ်နှစ်သုံးလေးဖြည်းဖြည်းလေးရှုထုတ်လိုက်ပါထွက်လေတစ်နှစ်သုံးလေးနောက်တစ်ချက်ရှုသွင်းပါဝင်လေတစ်နှစ်သုံးလေးထွက်လေတစ်နှစ်သုံးလေးဒီတစ်ခါကိုပတ်တာကောင်းထဲမှာရည်လို့ရပါတယ်ဝင်လေတစ်နှစ်သုံးလေးထွက်လေတစ်နှစ်သုံးလေးအဲ့ဒီလိုရင်းနေတဲ့အတွင်းမှာပဲမိမိစိတ်ထဲမှာခံစားခြင်းတဲ့ဟာကိုဝင်လေနဲ့အတူရှုသွင်းလိုက်ပါဥပမာဝင်လေနဲ့အတူရဲရင်မှုတွေကိုရှုသွင်းမယ်နောက်ထွက်လေနဲ့အတူမိမိစိတ်မှာမခံစားခြင်းတော့တာတွေကိုရှုထုတ်လိုက်ပါမထွက်လေနဲ့အတူကြောက်ရွံ့မှုတွေပူပန်မှုတွေကိုရှုထုတ်လိုက်မယ်ဝင်လေနဲ့အတူမျောလင်းချက်တွေကိုရှုသွင်းမယ်ထွက်လေနဲ့အတူစိတ်ဖိစီးနေရတာတွေပူပန်နေရတာတွေကိုရှုထုတ်မယ်ဝင်လေနဲ့အတူမိမိကိုယ်ကိုချစ်ခင်လေးစားမှုမိမိကိုယ်ကိုယုံကြည်မှုတွေအလေးထားမှုတွေရှုသွင်းမယ်ထွက်လေနဲ့အတူမိစိတ်ကိုထိခိုက်စေနေတဲ့ကိုယ့်ဘာသာအပြစ်တင်မှုတွေကိုယ့်ဘာသာမကျေနပ်မှုတွေထိခိုက်စေတဲ့အတွေးတွေကိုရှော့ထုတ်လိုက်ပါကျမဥမာလေးနဲ့ပြောရကျမအခု10စက္ကန့်လောက်ပဲခဏလေးပဲလုပ်ပေမဲ့ဟိုအတော်လေးတတဝမယ်လို့ကျမမျှော်လင့်ပါတယ်ဥမာဒီဟာလေးကိုပေါ့နော်နေ့စဉ်နေ့တိုင်းမနက်တိုင်းအိယာထားရနဲ့10မိနစ်လောက်အချိန်ပေးပြီးကျမလေ့ကျင့်စေချင်ပါတယ်အဲ့လိုလေ့ကျင့်ခြင်းအပြင်ကျမတို့ကစိတ်တဲ့ကျဉ်းတဲ့ခံနိုင်မှုတွေပို့ပြီးမြင့်တင်လာပို့ပြီးတော့ပေါ့နော်ခိုင်မာလာမှာလို့ကျမယုံကြည်ပါတယ်နောက်တစ်ချက်ကကြတော့ကျမတို့ပေါ့နော် trauma reaction ရှိနေရဆိုတာဒီစိတ်ဒဏ်ရာရေးကြောင့်မို့လို့တခါလေးကိုစိတ်ကနားရဲမှာပဲတနတ်တန်ကြီးပြန်ကြားနေတာမျိုးမျက်လုံးထဲမှာဒီပေါ့နော်သွေးထက်တန်ရဲ့ပုံရိပ်တွေဓာတ်ပုံတွေပြန်မြင်နေရမျိုးဖြစ်နေတတ်ပါတယ်ဒါစိတ်ဒဏ်ရာကြောင့်ဖြစ်တဲ့ကိစ္စတွေပေါ့နော်အဲ့လိုဖြစ်နေတဲ့အချိန်မျိုးမှာကျမတို့ကိုယ့်ဘာသာပစ္စုပန်တဲ့ငါနေနိုင်မှရမယ်ဆိုတာမျိုးလေ့ကျင့်ဖို့အရင်ရေးကြည့်ပါတယ်အဲ့လိုလေ့ကျင့်နိုင်ဖို့အတွက်ကိုယ့်ဘာသာကယူဆိုင်ဖို့ပေါ့နော်ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ကိုယ့်ဘာသာပြောလို့ရရဒီနေ့ဘယ်နေ့ရက်လဲဒီနေ့က August 30ရက်နေ့ဒီနေ့ August 30ရက်နေ့မှာငါအခုလောလောဆယ်လုံခြုံနေလွန်ခဲ့တလားပြလွန်ခဲ့တဲ့နှစ်ကပြငါငယ်ငယ်ငါပြငါမလုံခြုံခဲ့ဘူးဒါပေမဲ့အခုလောလောဆယ်မှာငါလုံခြုံတဲ့နေရာမှာရှိနေရ ဆိုတဲ့အခါကျတော့ကျမတို့ကပေါ့နော်ကိုယ့်ရဲ့အာယုံတွေကိုအသုံးချပြီးတော့ပစ္စုပန်တွေကိုပြန်လာဖို့ရည်ကြည်ပါတယ်မျက်လုံးထဲမှာပိုင်းမြင်နေလဲကျမတို့ဆိုအပင်လေးမြင်နေရ Yasmin နဲ့ကိုဘတောင်မြင်နေရအတန်ကနားထဲမှာလဲပေါ့နော်ကျမတို့စကားပြောတတ်မယ်ကြားနေရဆိုတော့ကိုဘတာပြောလို့ရတာငါနားထဲမှာတနက်တန်လေးကြားနေပေမဲ့အခုလောလောဆယ်တော့ငါလုံးချုံနေပေါ့နော်ငါဘာငါလည်းလုံးချုံအောင်နေမယ်ဆိုချစ်ကျွေးမှုတွေနဲ့ကျမတို့ကကိုဘတာနွေနွေချွေချွေပေါ့နော်ယူရမွေပေးဖို့အရန်လိုအပ်တယ်ဥမာအပြင်ကျမတို့ချစ်ခင်တဲ့လူတယောက်ကကြောက်တယ်ငိုနေရဆိုကျမတို့ကနွေချွေမှုပေးတယ်လို့ပဲကိုတိုင်းကိုလည်းအဲ့လိုမျိုးပေးဖို့လိုအပ်တယ်ပေါ့နော်မိဖတာချွေပတ်မှုပေးပြီးတော့ပစ္စုပန်တဲ့လာမျိုးအခုလောလောဆယ်ငါလုံးချုံနေငါလုံးချုံနိုင်အောင်ဆက်ပြီးတော့ပေါ့နော်ရှေ့ဆက်သွားမယ်ဆိုရဟာမျိုးတိဆောက်ဖို့အရေးကြီးပါတယ်နောက်ဆုံးတစ်ချက်ကတော့ကျမတို့ကပေါ့နော်ဒီ self blaming thoughts ဆိုခေါ်ကိုယ့်ဘာသာအပြစ်တင်မှုတွေအရင်ပဲများလေးရှိပါတယ်သူတို့အမျိုးသမီးတွေမှာပေါ့နော်အဲ့လိုအခြေအနေမျိုးမှာကျမအရင်အရေးကြီးတာပြောပြချင်တာတော့ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ဒီနေ့ဒီအသက်ရှင်ပြီးတော့ကိုယ့်ဘဝဇာတ်ကြောင်းကိုပြောနိုင်သေးရဲ့ဒီနေ့ဒီအသက်ရှင်နိုင်သေးရဲ့ဆိုတာကိုတိုင်းကရှင်တန်သူတယောက်ဖြစ်နေအကောင်းဆုံးကြော်ဖြတ်ခဲ့လို့ဖြစ်တယ်ပေါ့နော်ကိုတိုင်းကဒီချက်ပို့ပြီးတော့ဘာမှပို့ပြီးတော့မလုံးနိုင်ရလေကျွန်တော်ဘာသာအဖြစ်တင်လို့ရှိရင်အဲ့လိုမျိုးတွေပြန်ပြောပြပါဦးဒီချက်ဘာမှလုံးနိုင်လုံးစရာမလိုသူများငါ့ကိုဟိုဒီစစ်ကောင်စီအနေနဲ့ဖြစ်ပေါ့နော်စစ်သားရေးအနေနဲ့ဖြစ်ငါ့ကိုမသေးသေးအောင်တတ်နေတဲ့အချိန်မှာဒါမှမဟုတ်ရှင်အကြမ်းဖက်မှုအများကြီးနဲ့ပေါ့နော်ငါ့ကိုတိုက်ခိုက်နေအချိန်မှာဒီနေ့ထိငါအသက်ရှင်သေးရဆိုတော့ငါရဲ့အောင်ပွဲပဲဒါငါဂုံယူရမယ့်ဟာပဲပေါ့နော်အဲ့လိုစိတ်လေးနဲ့ရှင်တန်သူရဲ့စိတ်ဆိုတဲ့ကျမတို့ကိုဘာသာဂုံယူနိုင်တဲ့စိတ်ပေါ့နော်pride နဲ့ဂုံယူနိုင်တဲ့စိတ်နဲ့ကျမတို့ရှေ့ဆက်ဖို့အရင်ရေးကြည့်ပါတယ်သူတို့ကကျမတို့ကိုပေါ့နော်ငါမှဖြစ်ရလေခြင်းငါတို့ဘုံမှာဖြစ်ရလေခြင်းဆိုတဲ့ victim ပေါ့နော်ကိုဘာသာစိတ်အားငယ်မှုတွေနဲ့ရှင်တန်နေစေခြင်းနဲ့စစ်ကောင်စီရဲ့လက်အောက်မှာပေါ့နော်ကျမတို့ကအဲ့လိုမခံစားဘူးဟိုကျမတို့ကရှင်တန်ခဲ့လူဖြစ်တယ်ကျမတို့ဖာလည်းဂုံယူရဲကျမတို့ရဲ့ပေါ့နော်community ကိုလည်းဂုံယူရဲကြဆုံးသွားတဲ့လူတွေကိုလည်းဘယ်တော့မှမမေ့ဘူးသူတို့ကိုလည်းအမြင် honor လုပ်မယ်အမြင်ကြီးပေါ့နော်မှတ်မိမယ်ဆိုစိတ်တွေနဲ့ရှေ့ဆက်သွားဖို့ပေါ့နော်အရင်ရေးကြည့်ပါရဲ့အဲကြောင့်ခုနကကျမပြောတော့ grounding techniques တွေလေ့ကျင့်ပြီးတော့နေ့စဉ်နေ့တိုင်းပေါ့နော်ရှင်တန်သူတွေရဲ့စိတ်နဲ့ပေါ့နော်ရှေ့ဆက်ပြီးပါလေကျမပြောပြချင်ပါတယ်
Thank you so much for that. That's awesome. I'm definitely going to make a separate video with you just sharing this so that we can make sure that it reaches the audience that we need. Now, I'm going to open up the floor for the question and answer. We might not have as much time because we've already gone over time a little bit. And thank you so much, Ma, for actually staying with us. The first question...
yes, I would love to hear some questions. Just wanted to let you know I have to run in about 10 minutes though for me
absolutely. I think there are just 2 questions right now, and if there are any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us, you know, on Twitter or on Facebook.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, there is the first question. Sorry, Brother Zurul-Haq. There's another question that came before yours. I'll give you the chance to ask the question after this one.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
The first... Sorry. The first question is coming from Yuki. She said, thank you for sharing your view. How do you consider traditional way of mental healing, such as the Natkado? I think that's how you pronounce it. Do you think Myanmar needs to import resilience, Western resilience, instead of traditional local remedy?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Yuki. So Nakado, I think like kind of the spiritual what are those kind of like practitioners, right? Like they're trying to get connected to the spiritual beings and like they were like dancing and praying for you. And I know some of our cultures, you know, I think especially like Buddhists might be participated in those. And, you know, for me, when I think about resilience, whatever gives people meanings to move forward, whatever gives people strength to move forward is resilience, right? So for us, it's really important for us to be grounded and value our culture. And like, even within Myanmar, we are so like ethnically rich and diverse that we are going to have different practices, spirituality practices, religious practices. And yes, like, you know, for that relevant communities, they can, they get to define whatever is resilience for them. For me, as clinicians, I don't get to define. My clients get to define what resilience is for them. So for me, when I work with my Muslim clients, I let them teach me what Quran is, telling them about resilience. I'm a Buddhist, so but even for my Buddhist clients, they believe some stuff differently than me. I let them tell me what resilience is for them. For my Christian clients, like I ask them to tell me what God would tell them, in terms of resilience in their moments they need survival and strength, right? So it's going to be different for everybody. My quick answer is, we don't need to import Western resilience. The resilience definition currently in our field of psychology is that it's just the process of being able to move forward, being able to adapt in the face of very challenging, very extreme life circumstances. So whatever that process looks like for us, that's resilience. So we so that's our definition. And another really important thing about resilience, since that's my research, sorry, I have a lot to say, but really important thing about resilience is, in our field we call that as ordinary magic. It's not extraordinary thing that only certain people possess. No, all of us can be resilient. All of us can learn to be resilient. It's a practice of learning that we have to learn. But one of our experts in the field coined that term that, Anne Maston is her name. Dr. Anne Maston coined that term that, resilience is ordinary magic, as in all of us, ordinary people, can learn to be resilient under extraordinarily hard times. And so that's, and I think an important message for people right now, for our Myanmar people, we are also extraordinarily resilient because we had to be 6 decades of systemic violence. We had to learn to be resilient, and we're really good at that individually as well as collectively. So I think we have a lot to teach Western clinicians and Western field of psychology what resilience is. But at the same time, for therapy, we can also learn from the literature what is working to heal trauma. So it's both ways.
Absolutely.
That's your question, Yuki. Let me know if you have follow-up questions or thoughts.
Thank you very much for that answer. I love it. It's important for us to not erase ourselves or erase our beliefs, while we're going through the mental health journey. I think we only have time for just one last question, and I think Brother Zoro Haq just maybe was dropped off. Maybe his internet connection wasn't stable. But if there is anyone else who would like to ask a very short question, I'm more than happy to give you the floor.
While folks are thinking about their questions, I also want to share a quick resource, Yasmin, if that's okay.
Absolutely, please.
So I have started this mental health initiative and educational platform called Resilient Myanmar. Speaking of resilience again, so we have a Facebook page, and then we'll continue to we have shared mental health providers' phone numbers and organizations, as well as we are planning to host more mental health webinars and grief support groups. We have done a couple of grief support groups for COVID and cool, so we'd like to do more. So I want to invite our Rohingya communities and anybody in the audience, to check it out. And then one of the partners that I work with have this page also called Cool Mental Health Support. So let me share the second link. So for that second link, you can go to that website and also request meeting with counselors or psychiatrists for free. And then you have to just fill out that intake form, and then so we will help you match with a counselor. So there are resources available. So I just I know we are in such dire situations, and providers are also struggling, since everyone is struggling. So but I just want to say that you might have to wait for a little bit, but we do have resources and clinicians who are all volunteering, Myanmar clinicians who are living all over the world. And I want to just share these resources with the community. Please utilize them if you need. And then, yeah, especially for women, I'm also a part of Sisters to Sisters activism network. And we are not mental health organization, but since solidarity is an important part of what we do, we also invite sisters from the audience and anybody right, and from this audience who want to stand with our sisters, please come, especially for Sister to Sister. Now we are also doing letters campaign to write letters to our Rohingya women. So, for letters to sister, when I think about mental health, I think, what's most important is, telling each other that we are not alone. We have each other, we stand with each other, and to make it as explicit as possible. And the writing, what's better than writing letters of strength and love and, prayers or like wishes during this time. So please consider sending letters to our Rohingya woman, to sister as well. So those are 3 main resources I wanted to share. Sorry, folks are thinking about.
Thank you very much. I hope that while I was sharing the screen, they could see the Facebook as well. I purposefully made sure that we showed the Facebook page so that people know exactly what the interface look like. So you can go like the page and actually follow, as Phyu Pannu Khin said. And I know, Yuki, you said, resilience and mental remedy is deeply connected with religion and tradition. Even in Japan, but many countries, traditional remedies lost their space, especially in urban area. This is not simple to say what each person needs for their mental health. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Would you like to say something about that? Also, action items that you have other than the pages that you've mentioned, so we can bring this session to a close.
Yes, definitely. Yuki, thank you so much for sharing that. I completely agree. I think like when we think about modern mental health, field, I think like sometimes people only think about like Western-based approach. I mean, I'm a practicing clinician, so I believe in those two. They are effective, like to relieve some universal suffering. But really holding a lot of honoring and like values in our own practice that Western mental health hasn't learned yet. So doing them both is really important, and like each person just need to kind of experiment and see what's most important to me in life to continue. Something right now for a lot of us, like what's most important, like culturally it might be family. For those of us in the revolution, what we value might be justice, right? Like, so even in the face of suffering, thinking about what does justice mean to me, like for my own life? How can I be kinder to myself? Because there's a systemic injustice. How can I like add contribution to justice by being kinder to myself? So those are examples of individual thinking. You have to be experimenting about what you value the most, but it's a combination of tradition and like therapy to really build your own resilience. Yeah. So in terms of action items, I think I will just want to continue raising awareness for mental health and to continue to use these resources, as well as to if you know and love somebody who is struggling, please try to be there for them by giving them unconditional love and support, and not shaming them. Especially for men, I think like culturally you might mean to be helpful, but some people might be like man up, which is like toxic, right? Like patriarchal like term that hurts everybody. So if somebody is reaching out to you, please don't shoot them down. Try to make space and listen, and allow both men and women to have their feelings and express their feelings, and that would be the most important thing. And then in the field of our psychology and trauma, there is also a concept we better understanding called post-traumatic growth. Yes, we are experiencing so much losses and horrific atrocities that no one deserves to, but because we are trying to get through these times, like we can really look forward to what is coming out from the other end. So really holding hope and trust in ourselves that, okay, I'm bound to experience post-traumatic growth too from this intentional work I'm doing for my personal lives, and how much more our community or society as a whole thinking about more justice and solidarity in the future. So that's just one thing we have to keep going on. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thanks a million times again for actually agreeing to do this and extending your time and actually sharing so much insight. That also takes effort for you to come out and speak about this. And so, you know, I would like everybody here and elsewhere, you know, who might be watching later, to rally around you and support you in whatever you're doing. And I've already personally posted some of the resources that you've mentioned, also your work with the Resilient Myanmar. Before we actually, you know, come to a close, I would like to share with you a little bit about, you know, the session tomorrow. And tomorrow we will be sitting down with one of my favorite sisters from our community, from the Rohingya community. Her name, you know, is Wei Wei. She's been such a great help and such a trailblazer in our community. And I will be sharing with you, you know, the details of tomorrow's information, but it's going to happen at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 p.m. GMT, a little bit early for Myanmar and Bangladesh, but I will definitely share that on Facebook. So please stay tuned for that. And this is the website or the registration page. And before we end, I would like to put a little bit of, you know, say a little bit of a Quran verse. I think that it would really help bringing things back to our origin, where, you know, Rohingya people very specifically hold on to their faith like no other. And that is something that I admire about our people. A lot of our people learn to speak so many different languages just to be able to actually understand the Quran and understand the ideas that are, you know, divine and, you know, we believe in. So my favorite surah is the surah that is called in English the Relief, or Ashar, and the verse I'm going to cite is on the chapter 94, verse 5 and 6. It says, فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا, which means, so surely the hardship will come ease. After the hardship, there will be ease. And then God repeats again, إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا, which means, surely, verily, with that ease, there will be, with that hardship, difficulty, there will be ease. So if we cannot draw any inspiration from, you know, the current situations that's so hard for us, especially those of us living in exile, especially those of us living, you know, in harsh conditions in IDP camps, God did say that after so much hardships, he will bring two ease, not just one. So we can take a relief in that. And I hope that, you know, that would help us to be able to feel a little bit more resiliency, like you just mentioned, and help us understand more and more this past hour. So thank you again for joining us. And my last remark with this is that, you know, we've heard a lot today from Phyu Pannu Khin, and you've been such a trailblazer in the mental health and deconstructing, you know, mental health to actually fit the ideals that are present in Myanmar. And you have faced many challenges yourself and decided that you would resist and resiliently dedicate your life in helping others. This is a very common experience among women in all parts of the world, ridden with complex and political instability. So we rise to the occasion and resist against the tide of injustice. As we move along, you know, in all of our conversations, I hope that in our own capacity that we would encourage, support, and rally around all of the women that have been on this webinar, and you, and all of the women that are doing the work outside of you know, outside of maybe our own realm and beyond. So with that, you know, I hope that we will create the world where women are recognized and credited for being the driving forces of so many wonderful social changes. And with that, please stay tuned for tomorrow's webinar. And you know, I hope that today you get to be kind to yourself and understand how you can cope a little bit better in this very, very unstable time. With that, thank you very much, everyone. I hope you have a good night. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you, Phyu Pannu Khin.
Thank you so much, Yasmin, also for saying that phrase from Quran that really gives me, you know, that's the perfect way to end our webinar. And I hope our audience also think about that idea of relief. And then, you know, that last thing, whatever, in the moments of, like, you know, when we need to hear wisdom the most, thinking about whatever spirituality, what would they tell us? Like, so our, as women and as survivors, our capacity to grow and resist is endless. It's really limitless, and we continue to grow and expand and be together.
Thank you very much, and solidarity to every one of us who've gone through this and are going through this. I know that there is an ending to this, and we will win. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye, Yasmin. Thank you.
Bye.